want to be on camera.
You're good. Hi, everyone.
It's on his to-do list. You're on my left. I have to make a trophy weekend. We want to wrap
Good to see you.
Hey there, sir. How are you? Anybody sitting next to you? Stop. And Scott, this is Chance. They bought a house next to Wheaton. New Weaver. It's the corner on Adams Road. So it's on the corner, yeah.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you all for turning out. There's a lot of people here. This is fantastic. And I just want to call us to order. We have an official meeting of the Planning Board and the Housing Subcommittee. And I will read off our roll and also point out members of the Planning Board and the Subcommittee. I'm John. Welcome. And Rebecca.
I'm here.
And is Phil here? No. Sue, who's also on the Housing Subcommittee, and Mike is, I just saw him, oh, there you are, who is also on the housing subcommittee with us. And Mark Sturgeon, I believe, might be showing up a little late this evening. And do we have Neil or Zach with the select board? I know we have Bill.
I'll take it.
And I also just want to call out everyone on the that's been working extremely diligently on the housing subcommittee. So it's myself, Sue, and Mike, who we already met. Also Matt, who's in the back corner over there, and Patty, who is right over here, and Bruce is right over there. And I don't believe we have either of Brian Chalmers or Eisenhower tonight, right? No. So thank you all for all your hard work, like weekly meetings and outreach, and just an incredible amount of work they've all been putting in. I'm also going to point out if anyone needs to use a bathroom. If you go out the door, down that way on your left, by the stairs there's a bathroom, and also out the door that way on your right there's a bathroom. And I'm not going to, actually I should also introduce Judy and Alexis from the Barrett Planning Group, who will be taking over any second now, I believe.
I think so.
And we'll be giving you an introduction to some of the work we've been doing and they've been doing to study housing in Plymouth, assess our situation, and then we've been working more recently, as we talked about this evening, on recommendations for what we might be doing going forward. Thank you all.
Thank you. I guess I don't need this after all. Good. So can you all hear me? So it's good to see you. Thank you for being here. I'm going to try to walk through a little bit about the project we've been working on and what we've been up to, and give you a chance to respond to some of the ideas that we have in smaller groups than this. So without much ado, you were already introduced to folks, so I don't need to belabor this slide. I think I'll just keep going. There is an agenda, which I believe you have copies up there. So I'm going to do a presentation. You can't come to a meeting without a presentation, right? So I've got a presentation, a little bit about the background on the project, some of the recommendations we've come up with. We did sort of an audit of your regulations. I want to talk about some of the key findings from that. And then we want to sort of focus in on some specific recommendations that seem like they might be doable sooner than later. But we want input from you, which is why you're here tonight. So at some point we're going to dispatch you to talk to each other with some facilitators from the Housing Committee and so forth. And we will be eagerly wanting to hear what you have to say. So I'll give you a little background about this project. First of all, your community, like many other New Hampshire towns, applied to a state grant program that was funded by ARPA dollars to the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire was particularly interested in trying to spur the construction of housing. Market rate housing, so-called workforce housing, just housing. So a lot of that ARPA funding was put into support for municipalities like yours to figure out what their needs were, look at potential impediments to housing development, and maybe try to figure out some strategies to address them. So your town intelligently applied to all three components of what's called the Housing Opportunity Planning Grant Program. So our work here started with a needs assessment. We then did what was called a regulatory audit, and then we're into now this sort of phase of regulatory development based on the findings from the audit and feedback we've received since then. So the timeline for this, we actually started working on it in January. I can't believe it's already the end of October, but the needs assessment piece was kind of through June. The fact is we're still listening to some, more. I'm sure we're going to hear more tonight about that as well. But the needs assessment phase was sort of the first 6 months. And then the regulatory audit was concurrent with that. And what that involved was looking at your zoning ordinance, your site plan regulations, your subdivision regulations, to try to understand the degree to which they facilitate housing versus potentially making it harder to build housing. We're now into this phase called regulatory development, and we sort of have a couple of deadlines, one of which is kind of right now because you're preparing for town meeting next year. But we're not disappearing in December, which is sort of the deadline we need to get things to the planning board. We're actually, you're kind of stuck with us until next July. Because we know there are things in our report that are not ripe for a town meeting next year, but probably could be considered in the future. And we want to make sure that the planning board has what I call text amendments to your zoning and subdivision regulations and so forth to be able to consider in the future. So we're going to be around for a while longer. There's been quite a bit of engagement. Planners like to use the word community engagement. I'm going to try to simplify this and say we've been consulting a lot with people in your community. Some of that was through kind of big meetings like this. My introduction to your town was coming here to do 3 days of interviews at a time that it was quite cold. That's how I met you guys, and a number of other people as well. So we did the interviews, we have done a couple of community meetings, we did a survey to try to test some ideas. We've continued to meet periodically with the Housing Committee, which has been just a tremendous sounding board. They're just people who love your town, I'll tell you, and they've been very helpful to us. And then meeting with the planning board as well. So there's been different types of conversation with the community over this period of several months. So we've heard a lot of things. Some of these may be resonant for you, and some of them you may go, I've never heard that before, which is fine. One of the things that I think has become clear, we heard it, we also see it in data, is that housing cost growth has been tremendous here. You've kind of seen it in your recent assessments. You probably all know your housing values are way up. So the good news is if you own a home, it's worth a lot. The downside is if you're trying to buy a home, it's hard to break into the market. You have very high property taxes. These are those things we heard. In fact, the first day I was here, I heard two things. Property taxes are outrageous, and I can't find a place to park downtown. I heard that from every single group my first day here. So we heard about a desire for more housing choices, different types of housing, but also concern about changing the town's sense of what it is, what it looks like, and also some concern about kind of tampering with private property rights, which is an understandable concern, and that's something we hear in a lot of communities. A desire to kind of protect what makes the town special. We heard about challenges with construction costs, labor shortage, which contribute to the difficulty of finding contractors just to work on normal housing, because the very high-end stuff is sort of what people are spending their time and their crews on. We've heard that it's hard for local and regional employers to find workers who are here, in part due to housing costs. It's not the only factor, but it's a significant part of it. We heard that town regulations and infrastructure conditions kind of all make it even harder to develop housing here in a way that's sort of economic. Impact of kind of longer term declining enrollment at the college and how that might affect the sort of streets and the neighborhoods where you have a lot of college housing. What happens to that as you actually see a real decline in that population, and what happens to that housing stock as a result? Varying levels of concern about local and university relations. We heard some of that. And no surprise to anybody in this room, not everybody agrees with everything we heard. So I just want to make that really clear. But this is sort of a sampling of the things that we've heard. So I'm going to talk a little bit about your zoning. Zoning 101 is one of my favorite topics. It's probably not one of yours. But you have several districts in your town, and I realize because of the light in here, it may be a little bit tough to read that map, but you have a large area that's called the sort of agricultural zone, the ag zone, so-called. You have a single family district. You have a small area that's zoned, designated for multifamily development. You have sort of highway areas, and then, of course, area designated for industry. And within each of those districts, these are sort of the different types of housing that are allowed at different degrees of allowability. In other words, some things are easy to do, some things are not so easy to do. Easy to do to a planner is, I can do it as of right. If I follow your rules, I can go get a building permit. Harder to do is, I think I can do it. You sort of say I can do it, but I got to go to multiple boards to get a yes, and I don't know if I'm going to get it. So, in there somewhere is what it means to actually allow different types of development. And you'll see kind of closer ups of this as you get into your smaller groups. I just want to overview for you. You have multiple districts in your town. I don't think it's too many districts. I've seen towns with 25 or 30 districts, and it scares me to death when I see that stuff. So, you know, in some ways your zoning is remarkably simple. In some ways it may almost be a little bit too simple, but that's for you to decide. You have a very interesting way of defining how much can be built on a lot in your town. So part of your dimensional table is the standard, how much land do you need for a dwelling unit? And then it shifts into how many units can you put on an acre when you get into the multifamily development, you know, the multifamily uses. So one of the things that we're recommending that we're not even going to get into tonight is just to simplify this table. Even if you didn't change the metrics of the regulations, just to simplify this table so people can read it, because it's needlessly complicated. Some housing terminology you should have. If you were at the previous meeting, you probably saw this Venn diagram. I just want to explain what this stuff is, because there's so much, there's misinformation, there's misunderstanding, and there's some accuracy. And kind of in there is, all three are sort of things I want to emphasize. Market rate housing is what you can sell on the open market. What you want to get for your house and what somebody will pay, that's market rate housing. Affordable housing may be market rate. It may be market rate. There are people who live in market rate housing who can afford it. So without regard for income, just affordability is, can I afford to live in my home? Workforce housing may be part of market rate housing. If your market rate housing is affordable to people at sort of the median income for your area, which in some areas it is, then it would be considered that workforce housing, as the state defines it, is also market rate. That's not really true in your town, but some communities we work in, it is. Then there are two different types of housing that require more financial assistance. One is low-income housing tax credits, which is specifically for rental housing. And the other is just this general term of subsidized housing. And subsidized housing can be anything from a rental voucher to low-income housing tax credits. That's why they partially overlap. But the reason we wanted you to just see this is that these terms partially overlap all the way down. So workforce housing isn't just housing for people who have very low incomes. It may in fact be the median. And I suspect there are people in this room whose household incomes are at the median for your area. I won't bore you with all these numbers. I just want to put this up so you have it. There are income limits that define workforce housing in New Hampshire. For homeowners, people who are buying a home, people who are living in a unit they own, the assumption is if they could buy that unit and have an income at sort of 100% of the median for your area, that would qualify as workforce housing. And if you think about who that might be, it's probably a full-time police officer, a full-time experienced home health aide, and with maybe 2 kids. That's sort of your typical family of 4. I'm never convinced anymore that we actually have families of 4, but I have 9 kids, so I can say things like that. But you know, a typical family of 4, 100% of median, that's kind of who they are. And if they can find a home in your community that they can afford, that's great. On the rental side, it's a lower income. It's called 60% of median income, and that's where that low-income housing tax credits program comes into play. So that might be a full-time truck driver, maybe a stay-at-home parent with 1 kid. But just to give you a frame of reference for the household types we're talking about. Those are the intended beneficiaries of state policy around workforce housing. There's a mismatch here, and I suspect it's a greater mismatch now than when we started this project, which was months ago. So your median sale price for a home in Plymouth a year ago, you know, these numbers up here give you a sense. 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, just look at a 3-bedroom home, $350,000. A family of 4 at that 100% median I just spoke about could afford $247,500 a year of a sale price, purchase price. That's what they could afford. So your home prices are in fact above what someone at your regional median income could buy. Therefore, there is a gap. What you do about that gap and how you do it is entirely up to local policy. But I just want you to understand why are we talking about this? We're talking about this because we were asked to take a look at, in phase one, what are the housing needs in this community that are not met by ordinary operations of the market? That's both an income issue, it's also a housing choice issue. Are people able to find the kinds of homes that they want to find in Plymouth? And then if they can they afford them? So we look at affordability as a piece of our work. It's not the only piece, but it's part of it. So we did the zoning audit, as I said. I just want to quickly sort of go through the topic areas. There's a much longer report on this, and believe me, you don't want me to go through all the details on this, but just to give you some highlights. So density, big consideration. Density means different things. It certainly means how many units can you put on an acre of land. That is affected by how tall can a building be, how many units per building, how far back from the street and lot lines must a structure be sited, how much frontage on the street must a lot have in order to be a legal lot. Do I need to go to the board of the ZBA for a special exception or the planning board for a conditional use permit in order to get some additional density, perhaps? And then what is actually, how does all this play out in terms of the people's sense of the character of their town? So we looked at kind of different issues around density in your zoning and said, you know, if you're trying to produce more housing, this is an area you probably want to look at. If the goal is to try to unlock market demand that is not able to be met here, this is one area to look at. Another area was accessory dwelling units. We actually were asked to kind of look at the zoning for that. And you have some inconsistencies. Your zoning has a lot of little inconsistencies in it. It's like I would love to just take a pencil and fix it, but that's sort of beyond our scope, even though it's what we want to do. But you have a table of uses like every zoning ordinance. There's a table by districts. Here are different uses, and here's the degree to which they are allowed. It's either a yes, go get a building permit, or it's special exception, go to the ZBA, or it's conditional use, it's planning board. So in the table it says ADUs are allowed by right. But then you get into the text of the ordinance, it says, not so fast, it's conditional use permit. So there's inconsistency within the zoning. That's an easy fix, but it was one of the things we were asked to look at. So one of the recommendations we've made, obviously, is to fix that inconsistency. The minimum parking requirement, I've gathered some patience with this. It's been hard. As a planner, I look at your parking requirements and I want to cry, in part because I just think they're excessive, and in part because environmentally it's not a great idea. But I get it, I'm not going to argue anymore about parking. I just want you to know that when you require 2 parking spaces for a single family home and 2 parking spaces for an ADU, you're asking for an awful lot of parking. The other thing that's weird about your ADU ordinance is that it says, oh, and by the way, any units created here, those will count as workforce housing. That's actually contrary to state law. So that also needs to be fixed. We looked at open space residential development. You have a little confusion, again, in your ordinance, some inconsistent terms. There's sometimes it refers to a cluster development, sometimes it's open space residential development. We kind of think the intent is the same, but the terminology needs to be cleaned up. There's also some weird aspects to the regulations relative to the way OSR, I'm going to now default to acronyms, I'm sorry. OSRD, open space residential development, usually has a lot of flexibility in it around lot area, around setbacks, around frontage. And you do have provisions for reducing the minimum lot area and the frontage, but it's silent about setbacks. And so the more kind of rigid you are, the harder it is to actually do a true cluster, which is siting homes closer together in order to get usable open space around them. So we think that can be cleaned up, and we're actually kind of working on a suggested amendments to the subdivision regulations to do that. Off-street parking. I almost didn't even put this in, but I had to. Single-family and two-family dwellings require 2 parking spaces per unit. Now, for single-family homes, I have to tell you, that's pretty normal. I see that almost everywhere. Or I don't see any parking requirements for single-family homes, because some towns don't want to tell single-family homeowners that they have to do anything. But two parking spaces per unit is pretty standard. Here's what's not standard. For a multifamily dwelling, I need 1.5 parking spaces per bedroom, for the first bedroom, and then an additional half space for each additional bedroom. So you're regulating parking by bedrooms in multifamily, but not for single-family homes. That's unusual. It raises a question to a planner. Is the intent here to discourage multifamily development? Only you can answer that question, but it's certainly one we asked. There's some confusion in the table of uses around when a special exception is needed for parking. It's an easy fix. Basically, the way it's written right now, you'd almost have to get a variance for any kind of parking, and so we're going to fix that. I won't even bore you with it. It's just a badly written section. Site plan review encourages year-round parking. I can't talk tonight. Rear yard parking, which is great. Most planners would say that's awesome. But when you have front setback requirements that are really deep, you make it harder to do that. So if you want rear yard parking, which is great, you don't have parking out by the street, you got to think about the front setback for a building. Another topic area was just administration. How does your zoning actually work? How do your subdivision regulations work? How does site plan review work? There's some great ideas in your site plan regulations. There's some really good stuff in there. There is some confusion though. I think some of it may just be a wording cleanup or something, but design guidelines and when and if certain kinds of studies will be required, how soon that decision gets made. There's some ways that it could be tightened up so a developer has a little more certainty about what they're probably going to have to do to satisfy the site plan review process. The other thing that's just, I think, a nightmare in this town, it's my opinion, I get to have an opinion tonight, split lots in this community are very scary because you have a lot of them. Split lot is, I have a lot and there's more than one, it's in more than one zoning district. So what are my zoning rights? Well, your zoning ordinance says, if you have a split lot, the regulations that apply to the whole lot are those that apply to the less restrictive district. Usually zoning says, if you have a split lot, you go by a percentage, what percentage of the lot is in whichever district, and that tends to govern what can be done. But that's not what yours says. So even in a district where you might have use regulations that say you could do a lot of cool things, if part of it's in the single family district, that's what's going to govern. So there needs to be some cleanup on this because that really is an unusually restrictive rule. And I don't know what the genesis of it is, but I just want you to know that's not normal. And if you love it, keep it, but it's not normal. Then there's just miscellaneous conflicts between subdivision and site plan review. And these are things that we know we can sort of clean up. So we put all of this into a report, and people probably had a heart attack the first time they read it. And we understood that. So we tried to kind of narrow what we thought was most important. And I just want to review some of this with you because you're going to hear about these things in your groups. So one is, encouraging developers to build homes in areas that have adequate utilities. It looks like over time, your town has increased your minimum lot area, increased your setbacks, increased your frontage, and so one of the maps in this set of stuff we have here is just all the lots in your community that don't conform. That's scary. I mean, people with non-conforming lots really have a unique challenge trying to do anything with their property. So we're just saying, I don't look at this, and then bring kind of your density regulations in line with what's actually on the ground. You walk some of your really cool neighborhoods around the downtown area, and then you look at the zoning, they're completely out of alignment. And that's been policy decisions made by the town over a period of time. Focusing on building types that encourage home ownership, which is really detached and attached single-family homes. Now, the truth is you currently allow multifamily buildings in your zoning up to 6 units per building. What you don't really define is whether that is stacked or side by side or whatever. And that could be a good thing, but if you're actually trying to focus on encouraging home ownership, you really need to have a specific definition in your zoning for attached single family. Because what that is it's not stacked. It has to have an entrance at grade, just like a regular single family home. They just happen to be attached. So you can limit how many of those are in a building, but you're creating single family home ownership options that are a little cheaper to build and to buy than a detached single family home. So think about ways that you could use those to actually encourage more homeownership production. Because rental development doesn't build 4-unit buildings, it's just too many walls, it just doesn't happen. Allowing ADUs as of right instead of the conditional use permit, which it appears that you intended to do, but the zoning is confusing. And then just consider some areas where perhaps you could do 2-family homes as of right. Updating the cluster/open space residential development to get higher quality, well-designed projects. Open space residential development can meet the metric for open space, like say you require 40% open space. That's really not what's relevant. What's relevant is how that open space serves the interests of the people who are going to live in that development as well as the neighborhood. So open space residential development, when it works well, isn't just about a quantity of open space. It's about how it's sited on the lot and how it relates to the homes in the development and as well as to the street. So some of those qualitative standards would help you a lot. Considering some overlay zones, I'll explain that in a second, on Fairgrounds Road and Tenny Mountain to encourage housing options in the ag zone where otherwise they just really don't exist. An overlay district is simply another type of zoning district. It sits on top of what you already have. It doesn't take away any rights that already exist. It just creates more opportunity for landowners in those areas. So one of the activities you're going to do is kind of helping us think about, well, if you were going to have these overlay districts, what would you want to see in them? Allowing multifamily as a right in the multifamily district, which may seem like a radical idea, but it is a little weird to have a district called a multifamily district and then not be able to actually do it without special exception. Just leave that at that. Using site plan review to get quality development. Zoning alone doesn't necessarily do that. You can have pretty restrictive zoning and get crappy development. Site plan review is really the way you get better quality. So rely on that, not such prescriptive density rules. And then consider adopting this concept called inclusionary zoning to encourage developers to provide some workforce housing units. Inclusionary zoning is this concept where you say, if you will, developer, give us some workforce units, we'll give you some extra market rate units. So you make it kind of palatable for the developer, but you meanwhile get units that will count toward your statutory fair share requirement, which every town has an obligation to do. So inclusionary zoning may give you a way to do that kind of incrementally in different types of developments. So we want to get some input on that as well. So I appreciate you letting me get through all that. I should have said at the outset, could you please be quiet until I get through this because I'm old and I forget, but thank you for being so polite. We're actually going to ask you to get into some discussion groups now to sort of talk about some of these ideas. We have tables out there, we have tables in here, hoping that doing so will make it easy for people to hear. And so I want to just quickly go through the questions just so you know what you're going to be asked. Okay? So there's a set of questions that are really around restoring what Plymouth had in terms of that character, its historic character, encouraging housing, and then clarifying what you allow versus encourage. So the questions are about encouraging housing by reducing some of your dimensional requirements in sewered areas in single family and multifamily district. Allowing multifamily 3 to 6 units per building is the way you define it now in the multifamily district rather than by special exception. And then allowing attached ADUs by right, attached and detached. Yeah. Rather than by as a conditional use. So that's one set of questions we're going to ask your input on. Another set of questions is around these overlay districts. So you're going to see a map of each one. And the maps are conceptual, by the way, folks. Part of what we'd love to know is, did we get these boundaries right? But we're going to ask you for each one of those, do the boundaries we're showing make sense? What housing types would be suitable in this district? And then would you be comfortable with any of the following? And so it's different types of housing. We want your input on that. For each one of those areas. And the answers may not be the same because they're different parts of, different areas of town. We have some discussion questions about residential use types. So we have some images. We did this in the June meeting as well, but just looking at some images of different types of housing. Tell us, what do you like? What do you not like? And would this be right for Plymouth in some area of town? And the reason we're asking that question is that we think that perhaps with some improvements to your site plan regulations, you could actually get better development than you're getting now. And then the inclusionary housing question is just, do you want to look at the affordability, income limits and so forth? Do you think those price points are meeting the local needs of the community? And then how can Plymouth perhaps increase the units that are in those price points. So, before you all get up, my partner in crime here will explain to you exactly what you're going to do. But my job is to tell you that there's a question that you're going to be asked which is not on your sheet, and that is an icebreaker. Do you all know what icebreakers are? Icebreakers are you all get together and you got to break the ice. Right. So the icebreaker question, which is not written down, is what do people mean when they say there's no place like home? That's your icebreaker. Your turn.
Okay, thanks everybody, and a big thank you to our committee members and planning board members who are helping facilitating and taking notes. So the first thing I want to clarify for my facilitators and note takers, in question number 1, where it talks about allowing attached ADUs by right, that should not say attached. Currently you allow attached and detached by conditional use, and so we're just advocating making it by right, not by conditional use. So that should not specify attached, so I apologize for that. So facilitators, just take note of that. And then the other question types Judy already went over, but there are visual aids at your groups. And so, you know, you'll have some spread on the table, but also there are posters to help guide the questions. And the only other thing that I want to say is we're kind of, you know, relying on you to, 1, take your chair with you if you want to sit. And 2, just kind of, you know, we have about 30 people here, not including committee members and planning board members, and we have 5 stations set up. So if you see that there's more than, say, 6 people at a station, if you could just, you know, find another table. If noise kind of bothers you, you might want to take one of the stations out there. So there are 2 out there and 3 in here. And then facilitators and note takers, if there are any questions, we've unfortunately tied Joseph up in a group, but Judy will be floating around as well, so you can just flag her down and she'd be happy to help as well. But that's it. So
If I could also mention,
yeah.
I did not introduce Joseph when we were doing the productions. And so we have
Joseph's
Joseph,
our hero.
our community planner, who has also been working tirelessly and wonderfully on that housing project, among other things.
Yes.
Thank you, John.
Yes. Thank you, Joseph. So anyway, yeah, station there, and then 2 out there. So again, if you see more than 6 people, please just try to spread out. Facilitators, take your pick, and just make sure you bring your note takers.
I know, I have to write
Very late when you're helping me live.
Just didn't want it to fall over.
Thank you. Great. So, the mission of the small group is to find out if we can, on this committee, also so, on the first question, encouraging housing by reducing dimensional requirements for lot size. Yes, my name is Mike Avery, I'm on the planning board as well as the housing committee, Joseph. Any plan from this town is extremely lucky.
I think that's what
to have. It's awesome.
That's a good question, and perhaps we should talk about that more afterwards as well. I mean, on a certain tactical level, we all know this. As kind of inventory, we're not, in fact, there are legal reasons not to differentiate because of like fair housing. like that it starts more discriminatory against students. And no, and there are some interesting things going on there. See, with fewer students living off campus, that starts to change dynamics. But I don't. But you're supposed to be talking, not me right now. So, oh, you found a way of transitioning out.
I did, yeah. We'll see how it goes.
So, we're gonna go around this table, introducing ourselves, and
we won't hear what
you
you
looked at question I already
in
got.
town that has 75 lots. We looked at some that had 10,000, we looked at some that had 12,000, and some that were much bigger. An acre is 43,560. We also looked at the fact that years ago, I was 15 or 20 years ago, Steve might remember, the town used to allow quarter-acre zoning if you had both public utilities of water and sewer. At some point, that changed to no smaller than half acre. So with both utilities, does anybody have any thoughts on lot size?
Just to let everybody know, I'll be taking notes as we go. I'll be writing it down here. So if I'm writing something down and you think, you'd like it clarified, or if I missed something, you have let me know, so we can make sure.
I would also add
comments on the board. And,
recognizing
reflect
this
it. I'll try to go.
that comes with stability should not prevent us.
zoning for single-family homes?
It would be for a single family.
Should not prevent us from being like, not just in planning, but in general, open to change as well, where we can see things that could be built on that are good, and also that just need to be changed.
Overlay possibly. That would
and-
include Fairgrounds Road, which is,
Good job.
so does anybody have a preference on whether you might prefer to?
Nice chance.
I think it would be good to have that in the budget somewhere. Maybe not everywhere,
I think
but
it's similar to you.
because,
Probably got something to do with,
you know,
have the opportunity to
natural
know our neighbors
people
and create relationships, which is
makes
makes
sense.
sense.
They want a big lot, everybody wants a big lot.
I think we also have a sense of familiarity and entire kind of area that I think promotes like a sense of sincerity to it, that maybe we wouldn't have the opportunity to do in other locations.
My name's Molly. I interpreted the question of what does that mean to me in a place like home. So I really like what you said about an area where there's a kind of neighborly solidarity that comes up for me, and then also very practical and speak things. So in New Hampshire, which is where I grew up, it's very much forest. That feels very homey.
Quarter acre lot had to have water and sewer, otherwise it couldn't be a quarter acre lot, right?
Right. So is there anybody that might have a problem with
Half
going
acre,
to,
half acre is where we are now.
where the most
Most of them.
utilities is the smallest lot we would allow is a half acre. And there's also talk, that the consultant thought about a builder's acre, which is a 40,000 square foot lot. And then working from there to half would be a 20,000 and a quarter would be 10,000. So allowing going to a builder's and getting to square numbers rather than 43,500. So
Would
there's
be a
talk
little
about that as
smaller than a
well.
quarter.
Slightly smaller, than a quarter acre or an acre. So there's that talk. And then there's also, along with the smaller lots, we would have to consider smaller setbacks, smaller frontage on the road.
Say, what would the frontage be on a smaller lot, right?
And I think in the single families, Joseph, is it 100 feet?
100 feet is the requirement.
So we'd have to set that back in order to accommodate quarter acre lots, otherwise it would be too wide. So those are some of the things the planning board's looking, we're looking for your feedback. It looks like there's no one that's against it from just talking about that one small
My
lot.
question here is, we're just talking about the size and the utilities, the sewer and the water. And also just in safety, like the impact on traffic. The smaller the lot, the more the buildings, The more the people, the more the cars, and sometimes I think we make decisions too isolated. That, you know, we just talk about, oh, this is doable. And we don't think about the repercussions on that particular area for traffic. And that has a tremendous impact, not just on what you're developing, but on the people who already live there.
And that's why we wanted to know, get the flavor, the temperature of the public. And that's obviously,
The town, as far as
Home requires water. Whether it be the ocean or a river or something.
exactly, very few small areas.
Or lake, it needs water. I have a hard time feeling comfortable if the water's so far away.
I know. It's like I gotta have mountains. Scott, do you want to join our group? You're observing? Okay. I didn't want to leave you off.
All right, so in some ways, for me, that felt like a hard question.
I know, that's why it's good experience.
Yeah, but these are officially the hard questions, where we actually have to talk about some of the things we just heard about, which can get quite complex. But these are questions about potential changes to our town, and it's really important to get feedback. And some of these changes, like some of these early changes here, are changes that might even, as Judy was mentioning, kind of bring us closer to where we were, than what our zoning says we can do now.
You're saying where we were.
Well, I can just say, like, where I live, I'm on the street that I'm on Wentworth Street. Almost none of the houses could have been built the way they are under first zoning.
Oh, I see. Wentworth
Wentworth Street? Yeah, and so the properties are all smaller than what's allowed now. And setbacks are smaller than what's allowed now.
So you can almost,
that's what I mean.
you can see like the changing of zoning and the development of the town. So since we're on Parker Street, it's probably later developed than Wentworth Street. We have bigger
you were
lots.
asking about the multifamily.
So none of that area is really allowed.
Two decisions to be made.
So, I'm gonna read this. The presentation covered potential zoning amendments under consideration by the planning board. This includes encouraging housing by reducing dimensional requirements, lot size, frontage, setbacks, as we were just talking about. In part of a single-family district served by sewer. So not the whole thing, but wherever there's sewer. Allowing multifamily 3 to 6 units per building by right in the multifamily residential district, rather than by special exception, subject to the approval of the zoning board of adjustment.
That's based on the lot size.
Allowing attached and detached ADUs, these accessory dwelling units, by right, rather than conditional use, subject to approval of the planning board. Do you agree or disagree with any of the proposed amendments? Do you have questions?
Should we answer one by one?
You know, I don't think we have to put everybody in the spot.
Exception to have multiple buildings on the same lot right now, but it would still require that additional acreage, like you were saying. It would
So,
still,
and I think the two that are allowed, if you want to have three, you'd have to have slightly more square footage of the lot. 3, 4, 5, and 6, increasingly more square footage added onto the lot.
So there's a
Field parking spaces regulated in that too?
We talked about that the parking spots were like a half, we went by bedroom rather than by units. And we're looking to possibly, from her talk today, which was kind of a new discussion with the housing committee as far as that's concerned. I want to go on to the next question.
Let me just add one thing here. It seems to me as though we should be thinking about eliminating our height requirement. Our height requirement causes us not to be able to do something, for instance, having first floor parking with apartments above, which is
Underneath the building.
because you can't get inside the 30 feet if you have that. So that can be a solution to both the parking situation and the density situation. And I see no reason why we have a height limitation. you know, I think you know why originally was we didn't have the ladder trucks and all that stuff. But we do have ladder trucks now, and I don't think that, and all of that sort of stuff is going to be controlled by building codes. So to build for someone to build a multi-story building, they're going to have to do whatever the building codes require, which will be sprinklers and all that
So
stuff,
right now it's
right?
35 feet, correct?
So right now it's 35 feet, and it's defined as, well, I think there was a zoning change.
For Main Street, we determined that it was the average height around the entire building.
But, you know, what's the point? You know, like, we have, the university has already broken the mold on how high stuff is. Why should the private side go to put at the disadvantage of not being able to do height as well as the university?
And for those that don't know, the university does not have to follow any of the codes for the town. They follow their own.
So, sorry, that's a little diversion from the topic, but I
No,
think
that's
it's
good.
appropriate
Interesting.
right now because we're talking about density and about, you know, how do you achieve density? Go up, that's one thing.
Excellent suggestion. Next question.
Right, that makes a good point on fire protection, like you said, driving the amount of availability of the water within that certain area to provide additional fire protection for the buildings.
Sure. And the parking thing is just a bonus because if you can park, you know, there are examples of it. You know, we have those two buildings down on down by your place there that both have under lower level parking, right? Which makes it possible for them to actually function.
And the purpose,
Even though they don't have a parking requirement, which is another interesting thing.
and the purpose was the first floor because it's in the village commercial. Could not have residential on the first floor, so they decided to make So, good suggestion, Steve. Next question. ADU, which is accessory dwelling
For a while,
which you
became like the low end of the rental market. Interspersed with higher level housing. So there's an inherent conflict that they started out for good reasons like our intentions for, you know, the family. And, but they kind of degraded, they were marginal in terms of meeting standards to begin with, and went downhill from there. So there's a lot of complexity with ADUs, I'd be very careful.
And they are currently allowed, but you need to ask approval. And generally speaking, if you meet the requirements, you get that approval.
When you come to the town, we work on it
Attached building, we require separate
see what the progress are, as far as
separate here for water and sewer.
towns.
So if it's just a garage now, out of the living unit, because it's a fire code.
No, it would require.
Still,
So,
if it's got use of water.
Right.
What about
If it's a, then it would need.
Is there a limitation on where the
life safety, stability.
only on an acre or a
I
half
don't know
acre
where that
residence?
is.
I mean, a lot of that would mimic a lot of what's in our code anyway that you have to get for a building.
Thanks for that. I think certainly what the study I think is pointing out that we do need to be committed to change and supporting our community as it actually is in communities and supporting housing that can, you know, ultimately keep folks here.
We don't have a lot of ADUs.
And then I would agree that ADUs, you know, are a great idea and I think offer more affordable housing. But I would be concerned if we do not have regulations. You have to have a bar at a certain time, how many short-term rental such as like Sunday or Jackson.
I mean, right now, like, there aren't a lot of short-term rentals, comparatively speaking, in Plymouth. And
There wasn't a line.
Yeah, and,
and
fair enough.
Yes.
And
there's more
technically, according to our last planning director, short-term rentals are not allowed. Are not allowed in our community. Of course, in practice, they exist, and we all probably know they exist. But yeah, so
What are the repercussions?
Yeah,
That's not what to get into.
Yeah. So some of this is also enforcement,
Yes.
which is sometimes hard on a small staff.
Yeah.
Yes?
I'm not sure where the idea comes in this conversation, but, you know, you talk about the neighborhood where housing or Foster's father, and I'm kind of a believer in the importance of having density in living, as long as there's green space preservation. Because what's disturbed me about what's going on behind me on Chapel Lane, there are, you know, pretty big houses with a lot of green space, and it's all chopped up so that nobody else can use the space. So I think with all the concerns of climate change, we need to preserve and yet somehow provide.
But it isn't yet, it's not a residential zone. So we are, want to look at that as an overlay. What housing types are suitable for this overlay district?
Well, yeah, and by allowing for more density in some places, you also, your density will then allow more open space in theory.
People's concerns that, okay, all the land's gonna be chopped into a quarter acre lot.
Yeah.
That's the way it is in Southern California.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to see that, somehow we have this.
And just to clarify, like, this is where zoning comes in, they have different zones, and you can do it here, but not, like we're actually talking about 10,000 square feet, for example, perhaps in single-family residential, is what this is referring to. But that would be in single-family residential where there's water and sewer. And it wouldn't be the entire town. So to answer that concern. Or where the sewer, I guess.
Just sewer.
Yeah, sewer. Yeah, I should say water and sewer.
Yeah, just sewer. Just sewer. That's definitely important. Yeah.
Single family residential zone area that's outlined.
Yeah, the yellow.
There needs to be a study as to how far the sewer system could be extended to meet that space.
Well, and there's a few issues there, and I do want to move on to the next question soon. One of them has to do with currently private systems which might be taken over by the town. And another has to do with if you are allowed greater density with sewer, it might also give a developer incentive to build that out.
So the other issue is
So by adding duplexes, you could almost double the amount of homes.
What I'm trying to say, it's quite.
There's a number of those already in this.
Yeah, it's quite
Yeah,
dense.
that's true.
And you've got some 6 units that are in the fairground.
So, again, I go back to traffic, and I know I sound like a.
No, we want to hear this.
But it could get very busy at that, because I live at the other end of Fairgrounds. And,
By Loon Lake,
yes.
south.
Yes. And it seems to me that if we encourage, I don't, you know, allow that developers will pack that as much as possible, and it is already very dense. So you're allowing or encouraging, so I don't know where we're going with this, if we're encouraging or allowing. The other thing is going to be just solid housing.
Yeah, I think there's going to be considerations for primary roads versus secondary roads, maybe, or the speed of the road and the amount of traffic.
Speed of the road,
Yeah.
Fairgrounds is like, you know, people travel 70, 80 miles, because we're right on Fairgrounds. They travel 70, 80 miles It's unbelievable. And there's tons of traffic, because everybody is trying to avoid Teddy Mountain Highway and the terrible where Smith Bridge Road empties into Terry Mountain. It's like, so we doubled the traffic on our road, including heavy trucks.
So,
Huge, heavy construction trucks.
Has the town considered doing anything for making improvements to infrastructure, roadways and the sort, along with approvals for housing development? Jason,
There could be consideration for that, yeah.
Although you
I know.
can go through parts of the neighborhood.
It's been a few years, but
At least the stuff,
say,
you know, without
in
that.
Florida, a lot of places there, development pays for itself in the sense that when a developer comes in and wants to develop, you know, a 100-acre tract of land, depending upon the particular zoning and everything that's there, the roadways and the water and sewer and everything else that services those areas have to be upgraded and improved by that developer when the houses are going in or as the development is being built.
Well, and
In North Carolina, where I have family, that doesn't happen. You get the, like what you're saying, you get the approvals for the newer homes and the higher densities, and the streets don't ever get upgraded. You wind up
It's a
with,
straight,
you know, a
it's a state road.
two-lane street on what was a farm road back years ago. That never get improved, or the houses are all built,
State has
but there's no place for the cars to
Yeah, I
go.
mean, I think that's a consideration in
There
this
should be
area
zoning
too, is that
requirements.
Beach Hill Road, if you don't know, is kind of the main corridor to West Canton.
That's
So
why
you
we
get
get
a lot of traffic.
But if
I didn't know
if
that.
you're gonna increase, all I guess what I'm getting This is at this is good input. This is good input that we're getting.
would it be multifamily, would it be attached single family, just denser single family?
I don't know, my son lives in a very interesting high-density place that's relatively new, and that is, it has a real wide, it has a magical open space. Same houses, yeah, kind of all over Europe, it's sort of a European brick kind of thing with walkways. It's kind of dismal on the backside where you pull in, because that's where the parking and the cars and the deliveries are. But the rest of it is delightful, so dense housing could be done in a really fun way.
Exactly.
I read it, like I'm concerned about the floodplain, and I think that frequently floodplains are porous people get put there, and I think that would be very concerning, so I'd be eager to look at like 2050 climate models. And then, interesting, I'm also from Colorado, and I think they've done a great job of using natural landscape to both increase density, right, and put people kind of on top of each other, but also having green spaces that are attached to these things, because many of these folks are single family, 3, 4 household individuals with a dog or, what have you, and so I think specifically this area would be excellent.
Am I hearing like something like a open space?
I was gonna say, because like the
Development might be-
cluster.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I don't have a great understanding of it, yes.
Basically, it allows for greater density in return for creating open space.
Right, and I think there's really pretty good ways of being able to make that, a revenue source as well. I know this is on Tenny Mountain Skiway, having that as a mountain bike park, and
Look at the Tenny Mountain soon enough.
I know.
yeah, well, but just, I think we can utilize our area to support itself.
Yeah, you may, well, you probably will have the traffic if the fairgrounds comes into this street.
Yeah.
That's gonna happen anyway.
Yeah. That does remind me too, though, I think about transportation from out of Fairgrounds Road to downtown, and, you know, it's not super far, it's not super hard, but it's pretty unfriendly for anyone not in a car, which is, obviously we have.
It's dangerous.
Yeah.
It's a privilege too.
Yeah, we have this is a totally different discussion, but transportation is obviously intermixed with this, and I think that came up in the last meeting with the board too, which is about and tied into parking challenges, et cetera. I have a problem with the potential building height, that's my only concern, in that, I feel like it'd be really strange to have otherwise in an ag area, so very tall apartment units.
Okay.
And, I guess that's something I'd wanna see for the design.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a hill in there.
Yeah.
You could have nicer properties on the hill than you do. But if you put too many stories down below, then you block it all.
And just for clarification, the town's height limit everywhere is 35 feet.
Yeah, that's the thing too.
So we could raise it just a little bit and it would still be pretty short.
I mean, basically, it's like, that's a really kind of short 3 stories or a generous 2 stories.
Yeah, so we could go like 4.
Like the hotel managed to get 3 stories out of that. But there are 2 generous stories.
I'm concerned about the stress that puts on our fire department as well, as we increase our building height, just, and I'm uninformed, but I'm curious.
Well, clarity there, part of the, historically, the 35 feet was about fire suppression and ladder trucks and such. And a lot of that has changed by now. And we have the ability to do more. If we want to, though, there are other considerations, as was mentioned as well. Yeah. Almost. Are there any comments down?
Mobile home parks that are out there, the mobile home developments are in agricultural zones.
Oh, yeah.
So agriculture
And that
covers
Prior.
6 or more per acre, pardon?
How we do it.
Yeah, I mean, those are like, mobile home lot, those are probably very much smaller than a quarter of an acre, are they not?
They probably might be, because earlier zoning, if that was pre-1960s, it very well could be, because we have lots in town that are
So,
75.
They were mobile homes.
They're on private lots, so
Yeah.
fronting their public road essentially.
And they might have some common areas.
Yeah, we're not changing, you're not changing any of that unless by putting an overlay. I think if I understood that, everything that's there now is currently grandfathered in, so you'd be
Right.
building
Anything new.
in and or around for, you could make that a multifamily zone or district with, say, duplexes or quadplexes, however they would be.
So we want to know, what would we want to see by right? 2, 4?
Frank, we're gonna put you in charge of that.
How far do we want to go with that?
I go with 4. Depend on the size of the lot that it's sitting in.
So we would still have to go with a certain size for a single family, and then you want to add a duplex that is slightly bigger, 3 slightly bigger, so it would have some sort of parameters that are built in. So you think up to 4 for this overlay? Water and sewer, yep. So they could by special exception, but we're saying by right, you could just come in and do your 6. If you want to go get a special exception zoning board, you could do up to 6, and that's the maximum.
The other thing that works in is, it's kind of on the cliff a little bit, is water that comes down, so in terms of safety in the roads, permeability of the soil. I know that there, some planning board thing I saw where somebody had a single family home and it was constantly being inundated with water.
Is that the Texas or?
I think so.
So the state,
No, might have been. Was it big?
Larger developments, most likely in the zoning code requirement have to handle drainage
Usually you subtract slopes and wetlands from the density calculations.
I don't think we've,
The soils in this particular area, I can tell you, are very, very porous.
Yeah, that's for an example, that's a big sand.
Sandy loam there pretty much. So there is a lot of great drainage within this
This poor
overlay
guy,
area. Yeah.
when he went in front of the board, all he had was constant water in his face.
oh, yes, that's Page Street.
Yes,
Page
yes,
Street, yeah.
yes.
So, yeah, there were some issues with that. Had some engineering design and follow-up
I'm not retired yet.
the water issues went away. So the engineer, he was told he had to get engineering, because you can't have any more, after your development, you can't have any more water going off your property than did before onto your neighbor's property.
And that's what.
Prior to that, there was a period that there was a problem, but it got rectified, and I was happy to hear that too. I spoke up 17 years ago about that, 15, 14 years ago about that. So it's,
Oh, yeah.
These 2 4 units.
Not really?
we have space. We have something in our zone called cluster zone. Very few people have taken advantage of it. There is that ability to have less roads.
So are we willing to see more intense development there, denser development, different types of townhouses, 6-unit buildings, 10-unit buildings, currently not allowed in our zoning,
Keeping in mind,
single-family houses.
maintaining green space,
Yeah.
Rather than just the outside
transportation,
or something that's the wet
because
more that can be usable.
there's a lot of, there's a potential for a lot of
Single-family residence.
and they're going to be working in Bristol and Bristol, they're going to have to drive. They have a bus service. It's going to cause a lot of
Yeah, I think we're thinking more just reducing the size of the road, everybody's houses, lot lines match up to the neighbors, and then having additional common area on the back. Otherwise, I think what you're describing is development, where the roads are all owned by
I think Fairgrounds Road has a lot of pedestrian traffic. It doesn't have a lot of connection to downtown, but on the road itself. But anyway, are there other thoughts about what we would be willing to see there?
It's like, you have like, I don't know,
We have 5 minutes total.
Yes.
Well, it's fine. It's fine.
Well, I do.
accessible with sidewalks and what have you.
So the area
In the community, that everybody, you own a building and you may have a little bit of a yard, perhaps a patio right behind your building, but everything else is
So we allow
open
for that
space.
in cluster zone. So I want to get on, go ahead.
Just one more thing, I was thinking about you and what you were talking about back in Florida.
Well, yeah,
If
you
you
gotta
have major development like that, the developer, who's paying for the road? And well, the developer should. Does the developer then have, well, not always. Sometimes the developer will have a bargain with the town that says, you're not gonna get all of this money up front. You're gonna get it over a period of time in terms of the taxes. And those tax assessments are passed on when the developer sells the unit to the buyer. The buyer does not always know that he and she are taking on this. Sometimes it's 5 years down the road.
So that's a 79E, which the town is talking about, but we're not going to put it in front of the voters for this March. Something that we may talk about in the future.
So that becomes a problem if the buyer does not know that this is gonna kick in in 5 years.
Yeah.
And when it kicks in, what they thought
Your
was
taxes
very
could triple.
affordable
Special assessment
is
district.
now enormous.
So
And
that
they go
topic,
bankrupt.
so that topic will be coming up in the next couple of years, so stay tuned.
I just, if I could just like make a pitch for thinking about 6 units by right in the multifamily zone. If you're, if you want affordable housing, every time you build a building, it costs a lot of money. So if you can build 6 units in a building as opposed to 4.
So you're up for 6.
I don't live here.
Okay.
I'm just
I
saying.
don't really understand why there's any number. I mean, what's magic about 6?
I don't know.
I mean, we've always had 6, but isn't the lot itself going to determine how many units, and then the configuration of it, and the height of the building? And if you only have 6, you can't go up. You can go up, but
Right,
you
so
can't
if
go
you had
up
100
very far.
acres, you might
You know,
be
like,
able to put
I
100
think
lots
it's,
in 100 units in one
I mean,
building.
I think the 6 is kind of like
I personally don't love the
lead headed, but
I was told that it's to
to
prevent students, housing that attracted students. I don't know if that's true.
The mortgage rates will go residential to 6 units.
4.
That
For
is
you.
different to me, that seems like for.
Oh, residential loans you're talking about.
Residential loans, yes.
And I don't mind it downtown,
You don't mind more of that downtown?
I don't mind more of it.
But not anywhere else? Okay. Fair enough.
I've seen new communities built to resemble our downtown.
Yeah.
Your insurance
And I
is that
was shaking my head when I first saw it, it's like in the middle of nowhere, but they actually built a community. And the high density area was populated by numerous outdoor restaurants, things that people wanted to go to. So it was really attractive. And I'm sure it's beginning to feel like home to people there.
And you had to ask the person where it was, because they along with
It's magic.
So it is, stuff can be designed, not be 10 stories high.
for the 10 round area.
I suppose there is also the potential for mixed commercial to be, like refreshment. I can see that.
It has water.
So a little bit more downtown or like downtown Manhattan somewhere else?
I'm talking about that, I still love the engine personally, but I can see like the logic of if you have
They have their own water.
services closer to where people live, that really downtown.
So they probably could get to that
15 years since people want
Would
to
you be
live, work,
comfortable with following the overlay?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you think about the strip mall in Tennymountain where the big building is, it's been
Yeah.
what if they had built a second floor?
And right on Tenny Mountain Highway.
It'd probably change the businesses down there and they'd be more sustainable.
That might be.
The big empty building, the big restaurant.
So are we talking mixed use on Tenny Mountain Highway then?
I would be open to that, yeah.
Especially, it just seems like it's a drought there as far as actually income. It doesn't seem like most of those places actually do very well. Like compared to downtown, which is just, you can't get up to the parking spot. You can't see the competition.
Any place you have new density housing, especially if it isn't anywhere near downtown, you should require power outlets for charging the car.
We need to reconvene, folks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Great.
And not only one level. I love the idea. Well, that covers the first.
So we have to do a report out on this?
If anybody needs help putting a chair back, just holler, we'll help.
So, I just have to solve a lot.
I'm Molly.
all get back together, please?
Thank you, Thank you for all
Can we all get back together, folks? Yeah, here, or something like that. Does anybody here do like a loud one? I hear it.
See the row of contents that are there. No, I can't see it. I can't see it. But I'd rather not see it on, all in context. I can see one house that was being built. It's over off the street.
I think more public
So we're gonna start just a report out. You don't have to tell us every single thing that was said, because that would probably take a
Yeah, share something of consensus.
Yeah. We're kind of interested to hear what people have sort of tended to agree on. Not that I don't want to hear the disagreements, because we do, but we'll get that from the notes and obviously following up with the folks who, who facilitated the groups as well. But Sue, I think I see you. We'll start with you and Patty.
Okay.
Things are like broad consensus on.
So our broad consensus was in agreement that we need to look at all these different aspects of zoning, planning. We agreed with the overlays at both places. We talked a lot about a little bit of site plan review. As I have said in many meetings with our different housing types that we looked at, a lot of times when we did the meeting in June, I got mostly green dots across all the different types of housing. And I keep going back to, it was aesthetically pleasing because the landscaping was mature, the sidewalks were either paved or brick. So we talked a lot about the character of the different types of housing that are available, and we were in agreement that Plymouth could use obviously a wide range, but we also talked a lot about, in each one, about site plan reviews. So we don't control a developer, but we have some guidelines in keeping with the character. So this group was very in favor of creating opportunities for developers through our different changes in what we've been working on.
Great, thank you. Mike, I see you next.
Yes, so our group was pretty cohesive in agreeing that any barriers to building, say by creating as a right, a accessory dwelling unit, or in the multi-unit, to allow the 6-unit, rather than having to allow that step of going to the zoning board. Oh, there was a lot more. I had a great group.
I know you did. I know, I heard some of that.
There's some leeway with an overlay over Tenny Mountain, and there's a lot of support for Tenny, I believe. They love the idea of the overlay on Fairgrounds Road, but to me, I think any area that has water and sewer should be treated the same. That's my thinking, but there is an agreement that if you're going to put more than a single-family home, and maybe try and make it look like a single-family home, but have 2 units. So those are some of the great suggestions.
Thank you. That's super. Matt, who's reporting on you guys? Your groups.
Yeah, Bruce and I was doing the recording.
You take it away.
All right, certainly. So our group also found a lot of things in common. So looking at reducing dimensional requirements, all 5 of us were in agreement. Allowing 3 to 6 units by right in the multifamily residential, or multifamily district. We all agreed on that. And allowing ADUs by right, we also agreed on that versus the current conditional use. Moving into overlay districts, we'll cover the Fairgrounds Road one first. Actually, we're gonna cover the Fairgrounds Road and the Teddy one at the same time.
Totally fine.
So, what type of housing types are suitable for the overlay districts? Pretty much anything that we could think of in general is should be allowable, such as single-family homes, duplexes, multifamily homes, condos, townhouses, cluster developments, and up at Tenny, additionally, your luxury homes as well. Luxury homes.
Oh, yeah, right, oh, yeah, okay.
Moving on to the sub-questions of that, would you be comfortable with the following in these overlay districts? Increasing the current base density, yes, everyone is in agreement with that. Allowing more than one primary building per lot, yes, everyone was agreeing with that. Increasing allowed building height, yes, everyone was agreed with that. There was no number that we talked about, but someone said 60 feet might be a good number. Increasing allowed units per building, yes, everyone was in agreement. And then allowing single-family attached up to 4 units by right, such as townhouses, as we often think of, yes, everyone was in agreement.
Great,
And that's where we're going.
thank you.
Welcome.
Okay. I'm looking for pardons? Yeah. Yeah.
So our group, there was quite a bit of support, I think, for some of our dimensional requirement changes and some of those early questions. There was, I think, a good amount of support for the kind of targeted density in certain places. And one of the concerns that came up over and over again was, yes, more density by whatever means, we can talk about that, but also preserving open spaces and our natural environment was really kept coming back into the conversations pretty often. The overlay on Fairgrounds seemed pretty popular. The overlay on Tenny as well. I think we had a little bit more of an expansive discussion about Fairgrounds Road 1. As far as building types, I think there was some discussion. I'm not sure if it was full agreement or not, but there's definitely, I think, a good amount of consensus that, yeah, attached single family, good. Multifamily in other places besides where we currently have it would be helpful, especially with affordability and such. There was an interesting discussion we had of mixed use, which I think started more skeptically and got more and more positive about more mixed use development downtown, as well even potentially along Kenny Mountain Highway. Which is not where the discussion started, but it seems to kind of go more in that direction.
What do you mean by mixed use?
Like, for example, typically like downtown, what we see is like commercial on the first floor, residential above. It could also be side by side or different models as well. But to have residential and commercial uses in close proximity.
Along Tenny Mountain?
Again, it's not where we started, but the conversation increasingly kind of warmed up to that.
I think he means Tenny Mountain Highway.
Yeah, Tenny Mountain Highway. Anyway, that's the kind of the short version.
Thank you. Nice, that leaves us with you, right?
Yes, so in my group, just to kind of reiterate, a lot of it's already been said. I really can't think of any of the questions where there was disagreement. There was a lot of support. I think the one thing where I think there was some more nuance to the conversation was if you are going to allow larger multifamily buildings in either overlay, just more concerned about kind of the design. There was one image in particular our group did not like of the 4 that were there. So, just the importance of the site plan review process and design considerations if that were to be taken under consideration for either overlay. But otherwise, a lot of support. But please, anyone in my group, let me know if I missed anything.
I think that's it.
Well, are we gonna have open questions?
Yeah, we can take a few questions, sure.
So if anybody has more general questions or comments that you'd like to share about things we're considering right now, or even things maybe we should be considering? Yes.
Can I just mention again
Is there a mic to pass around?
Is this wireless? Can you pass that
I
around?
can speak loudly too.
But it also helps for,
Yeah, just
it also
stand
helps
up
for
and turn.
recording.
Okay.
For recording also.
Wow, so the only thing that I just wanted to bring up that I didn't hear that felt really large to me in our conversation was about the ACUs and concern with short-term rentals. And not just making ACUs turn into Airbnbs. ADUs, not, yes, thank you. So that was just the one thing I wanted to say.
Thank you. That was part of our conversation, which I had neglected to include. It came up early, so. Are there other questions or comments?
Okay, I gotta say it.
So, by the way, everyone, please identify yourselves.
So I've often wondered why it's a major tool for directing development is water and sewer. Why our town insists on having two separate entities with no virtual coordination between them. So where we currently have possibilities for development are where the water and sewer is. But how did we decide where the water and sewer is going to be? It certainly wasn't a town planning project. It was the water and sewer department who decided, and they decided basically, as I understand it, as I see it, based on where they think the market is, where they're going to be able to do the project because there's latent possibilities. So that's not quite the same as driving a bus in the direction where you want it to go. That's looking in the rearview mirror and say, yeah, this is where we got to. So just for thought, possibly the water and sewer district should be subservient to the town in respect to planning. Don't know how to do it, but there's the thought. Okay.
I would also add to that there is the possibility of developers building out a system and then with the goal of eventually tying it in, which is another way this can happen, and it could even be an incentive to have some of these changes to have them build out the system if they can get greater density for doing so. Are there other comments or yes?
Hi, my name is Stephen Kelly. I'm the current owner of Tenny Mountain, so it's great to meet everybody. We had a great discussion out in the lobby. So what's really critical to us, to be successful long term, which I think is in the best interest of, the entire town of Plymouth, not just Tenny, is getting some relief on what the current restrictions really are. We talked a lot about that, density restrictions, height restrictions, and for us it's really, to compete in the what is now a global world, but particularly within this region of winter sports, it's really becomes a real estate play. We need to be able to have development there that can accommodate housing of a variety of different levels. And the height restrictions, particularly with us where we're dealing with slopes, are really important. The front of the building is going to be a different height than the back of the building. So it's something I just think that we need to have the support of the town to be able to create a really dynamic environment there to really build a community. And it's really something I think that will, in the longer term, benefit everybody in the town, again, not just us at Tenny Mountain. I just don't know how that process goes outside of this small group here. How does that then make it to, say, the decision-making committee? We talked about maybe 60 feet, but again, that's a little bit arbitrary. If we're going to compete with, the Loon Mountains of the world, the Brettonwoods of the world, we need to be able to compete with the type of, offerings we're having out there. There'll be a lot of mixed use. There'll be some workforce housing, which solves for a lot of the folks who have maybe some affordability issues. We're going to have density, but there'll be luxury, there'll be market rate, there'll all different types of housing. We just need to know that we have the ability to, be creative and come up with a really awesome master plan that kind of checks off all of those boxes. So to me, the question is, what's next steps and how do we solve for that to make sure that we can incorporate that to ensure that Tenny Mountain is successful long term?
Thank you. Are there, yeah?
How many warrant articles do you expect to come out of this?
That's a great question. And answer, so I'll say this, at our next work session of the planning board, which is the first Thursday of next month, we're going to be trying to figure some of that out, because by December we'll have public hearings. And so to notice those public hearings and have all the information out there, we're going to have to make some of those decisions really quick at this point. And so part of that is going to that meeting and figuring out like what we're actually going to decide upon to actually push forward this year, maybe what we'll shelve to next year or not do at all. And another part of that is when it does come to those warrant articles, how are they written? Are things going to be lumped together or kept separate? And so it's hard to give you a number at this point, but we'll know soon.
I'm just afraid if there are too many warrant articles, there's a lot of people that are going to come in. They want to make all these changes.
Yeah.
I'll know the entire.
No, understood.
Yep.
One of the things we are going to do after we make some of these decisions is me and Matt, I believe, are going to be recording an interview with Dan and from PVTV, and hopefully explaining what some of these decisions are, because they can be kind of opaque and difficult to understand for a lot of people. And to, I mean, if you're here, you have a leg up, but especially if you're not here to hear all these discussions, to try to explain some of this to everyone and put it in layman's terms, so it's like it's not just the legal language or the zoning ordinance. It's still a question though, like if there's too much, it just might be like too much change. Even though some of that change might be to restore things as they were, but it's still change, and a lot, yeah.
Right, and
I have a question.
Oh, do you have?
I just want to add it to what you said, John, that I think those of you that are here understand that the zoning ordinance is complicated and changing it is extremely difficult. And I think a number of you have been through these sessions multiple times. I think we need your help. The change can be scary for a lot of people, especially when it comes to zoning. So relying on this group to get the word out and help people interpret the changes we're trying to make, and none of them are making anything more restrictive. They're all trying to encourage, what we've been working on, housing. So we need your help to make this happen.
Well said. Yes?
If and when the interview on PVTV happens, is there a way to access it when you don't have cable? And when will we know it happens?
I was just talking about this with Dan earlier. I do not have cable, and I just subscribe to the PVTV channel on YouTube.
Okay.
So all of this stuff is available on YouTube, and it'll also be linked to on the housing page on the town's website. And yeah, so we'll try to make it known. And there's also the newsletter now. I don't want to sign Scott up for anything, but you can also. Oh, he's done, okay. And so yeah, so if you haven't subscribed to the town newsletter, town manager newsletter, do so. You can do so right on the website. And there's a lot of useful information there coming out every week. Yes?
Yeah. Quickly, hi, Kathy Bentwood. I can't separate housing from jobs. So my question is there, and this might be for planning, is planning here? Yep. Yeah, so when you're talking about this opportunity for expanding housing, do we ever talk about, what I think about that has gone missing is Hitchness is no longer here, Plymouth Stitching is no longer here. I think, hey, Rochester Shoe, I think solar panel factory. So that's sort of my question, is that part of the conversation? Thank you.
I mean, the narrow answer is we're doing a housing study, not an economic development study. But the broader answer is, to some extent, if you want some of that type of economic development to happen, you need to have housing for the people who are gonna work there. So they don't have to live, 30 miles away to go to work.
Yeah.
So they can actually afford to live here.
Right.
And yeah, it's a chicken and egg thing, but, so they should go hand in hand.
Okay,
And,
thank you,
yeah,
that's all I need to
okay.
know.
Yeah, I just had one piece of that. Right, thank you. So everyone should have this, what we call a ticket to leave. This is just to kind of help, even though we have, our notes from our discussions and really great feedback, it would be helpful if you could just kind of check off on that column, and then you can, when you're leaving, you can either just drop it on that table, or you can hand it to someone with a name tag, and we will make sure we collect it. But it's just, whether you agree with something, disagree, unsure, or if you need more information. We'd especially love to know if you need more information, because that's helpful for us to know what the community might benefit from more education surrounding, especially if it's more complicated. So this should just take, a few minutes. It's all stuff we discussed tonight. Nothing is being sprung on you, but yeah, if you could do that and either hand it to someone with a name tag or drop on that table where you signed in, that would be much appreciated. And if you want to put any other notes on it, that's fine too. So.
I would like to thank the planning board and the housing committee.
Thank you.
Great job. Just don't give up on us. Keep coming, keep spreading the word.
And vote, yes.
And vote.
We can get a bigger room, right?
More than once.
And remember, the zoning amendments come up on Tuesday, not the Wednesday of the in-person meeting. From the planning board, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Okay, we are adjourned. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and thank you all for coming.